really, like, I would characterize it as a crisis of confidence. When I started my PhD program, I basically was like, what I want to do is work on water technologies for low to middle income countries. That's the reason I chose Oxford, because I got the flexibility to do that. The idea is what success means is actually what you define, because the nature of a PhD is you have to go into uncharted territory, and what you're learning is how to define something that is undefined and how to go and actually create that path there. So basically, if there's any time you need to be sure enough in yourself, it is like for the first time in my life, I felt like there was something that I wanted to do, and I physically as a human being was not capable to do that.
Greetings everyone, this is Yoftahe from the Yoftahe Show, bringing to you your weekly show. And today we have a special guest, Gayatri, with us. And most of the time when we talk about success, we just look at the person where they are, but we don't really look back what they may have been able to go through. Or sometimes we look at people and we may say, she's doing great or he's doing great, but we don't go the deep down question that says, how are you really doing? So today we're going to focus not only on Gayatri's success, but 2023 was really a toughest time for her, so we're going to divulge and go a little bit more and discuss that time. So Gayatri, again, welcome to the Yoftahe Show.
Thank you so much for having me.
To have you. Today we are at the roasted granola. We really appreciate for having us invited and giving us the space. I was talking to Gayatri how we wanted to do this interview at the studio, but we wanted to give you guys more of a natural place, or more like where people sit down. So coffee is part of call it mental health. So that's something that we can sit down and have a conversation. So we really appreciate for Roasted Granola to giving us the space. If you can tell us your name and what you're working on currently.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Gayatri Sundar Rajan. I am currently a DPhil Researcher, which basically is PhD in the University of Oxford. I'm in the Engineering Science program, focusing in chemical engineering. Alongside that, I'm a founder, CEO and CTO of a company called Aapka Shakti Ventures, which is focused on developing cooling and water systems for low to middle income countries. So our kind of goal is to enable water, energy, and food access now. So right now I'm really, I would say, launched kind of on the global scale, as well as really just trying to develop technology, meet new people. I have a travel Instagram. Really, like, my goal is to just make people's lives better on a small and a large scale.
Oh, I like that. And you're between the US and England?
Yeah, so I actually live in Oxford, Oxford, UK. But right now with my company, I have a lot of people that work in Boston, Massachusetts, because I went to Boston University. And I also have some people I'm working with in India, in like the Chennai and Andhra area as well. So really, I will be having about 3 bases, but kind of a good reason to move when the weather in one place is bad. There's a lot of excuses, a lot of reasons, but you know, this is one of them.
Okay, so how long, were you born in New England, or were you born somewhere else?
Yeah, so I was born in Chennai, India. So basically southern India, and I moved to the US in probably when I was about 1 or so, and I did that because of my dad's work that brought him to California at the time. And since then I've been in California, New Jersey, and several places in Massachusetts, but I would really say the place that I grew up was Arlington, Massachusetts, which we're really lucky to be in right now. And after that, I moved into Boston to be in Boston University, and then now I'm off in Oxford in the UK.
So you traveled a lot and you have done a lot. So today we're going to focus a lot on 2023.
Yes.
Because you told me that was like a very challenging year. People were thinking you were having the great time of your life, but ended up being the challenging year for you. So going back, when looking at 23, what sign did you see that when you look back and say, oh, this is when it started? Or what are the signs that you are starting to see when you moved from here to England?
Yeah, so I guess there's a few things there. So for the context, when I moved from here to the UK, I had just finished my bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering at Boston University, May 2022. I started my PhD in the University of Oxford in basically October of 2022 as well. So basically within around 5 months, I moved from a bachelor's degree to a PhD in a different country, in a different educational system, away from my family that I'd only ever been 30 minutes away from. So I don't know which one of the factors was the big change, but they all were huge changes. So I was building my support network, I was meeting people, I was living in a different place, I was in a different program, I was like, trying to make friends. So it was all of these things happening at once. But I would say that the reason why 2023 was such a tough year for me, the one that came right after that, about 2 months from when I went to Oxford, was that really, like, I would characterize it as a crisis of confidence. When I started my PhD program, I basically was like, what I want to do is work on water technologies for low to middle income countries. That's the reason I chose Oxford, because I got the flexibility to do that. I'm funded by the university as one of like the basically top 5 people in the engineering program because of potential for what you're doing in the future. So I'm fully funded, and I have kind of like no specific thing I need to do for my project beyond what satisfies myself and my advisors. And I came in because I wanted that flexibility to choose something that's meaningful to me and also meaningful to the community. The problem is that in a bachelor's program, what defines success is oftentimes what you submit for a degree, what you basically do, what you sign, like whether you get an A+ or not, is determined by somebody else. But in a PhD program, especially in the University of Oxford, it's quite independent. The idea is what success means is actually what you define, because the nature of a PhD is you have to go into uncharted territory, and what you're learning is how to define something that is undefined and how to go and actually create that path there. So basically, if there's any time you need to be sure enough in yourself, it is that time. So I went in being like, hey, like I know what I want to do. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'll get there. And I was like, yeah, it'll be done in 2 weeks. 2 weeks came, and then I was like, oh, I'm not there yet. Another 2 weeks came, and I was like, oh, it's not there. And there was a point where I was like almost failing myself. Nobody was actually coming back and saying like, hey, like you're a failure, you didn't do it. But it's almost like things were reinforcing myself because my expectations were not matching with the reality. Because in reality, if you notice, like if you're working at the cutting edge of research, it takes time to understand what the foundation is to then innovate on that. Understanding the foundation for me was actually a completely different field. Because I'm a mechanical engineer by training, I'm in a chemical engineering PhD program. At the time I left Boston University, I was just like, hey, like chemical engineering is mechanical engineering plus chemistry. But like, that's not the case. And I learned that the hard way when people would be like, oh, draw this diagram. And I'd say, oh, that's cool. Like, what diagram? Like, what is that diagram? What software do you want? So really I had to learn a whole new field, or learn a whole new research project, and do that in a way that felt authentic to me when nobody was saying if what I did was right or wrong, because I'm also in the British culture, right? Yes. So the culture is not this one where I give you an A+ and a certificate. It's actually the one where you might be even doing well and you don't know if somebody likes you. So that's the atmosphere that you're in, and coming from this place where I'm like looking for validation, right? Like I like when people say that my stuff works, and I like when it works for other people, and if I have no gauge of that, it's hard to know if what I'm doing is sufficient.
I think you bring up a good point. You said validation. We're all looking for that validation. Yes. For everything that we do. So where do you think the miss or the conflict was? Like you said, you had a set idea of what success looks like,
yeah.
And at the same time, the guideline it's not really there. It's just whatever you define it. If you don't have the mentors or the guide, it's very easy to be off course or really not a. You just said every week or every 2 weeks we're expecting something to change. Something that could take a year. Your measurements scale might be completely wrong. So going back, I think we will address this at the end. What do you think what would have been better, let's say, going from here to England, how you were prepared, or if someone is going right now from here to England or anywhere else, what would you say they need to be having in place so that they don't have that shock? Yeah,
so I think the thing is, what I would say is that you're going to have a shock, and you should have a shock, because when you go to things, this is a quote I think my dad told me, it's probably quoted from somewhere, but the idea is that if you're trying to do things nobody has ever done, or that you've never done, you're gonna have to do things that you've never done, right? The nature is if I am comfortable with something, that's probably because I've done it before. So you should face that shock, because that really means that you've encountered something in your life that you don't understand, and then your kind of process is to say, why haven't I understand it, and why has this shook me to some core? So I think averting shock is not the goal, but then there's a question of like, how do you be kind to yourself? How do you kind of say like, hey, here's something that I don't know, let me give myself the time and the scope to essentially say like, hey, it's not a question of whether I'm successful or not. It's not a question of whether I'm okay or not. It's a question of like, what needs to be done and how much time does it take to get there? What's something I know and who can help me? It's almost like everybody teaches this in project management, like the sense of like, what needs to be done, how do I scope it, who needs to be involved, and what's reasonable. The problem is when you apply that to your own life and yourself, sometimes it just doesn't work, right? Because somehow you think that you are just a superhuman, or somehow you think that like you would have expectations for somebody else, but for yourself, you're like, I expect more from myself. And now you're expecting yourself to operate on those grounds, and you're beating yourself up because you have the most information about yourself. It's like if your project manager was inside your head saying that every thought that goes in another direction is like a reason why you should question yourself. Now what you have is inadequate expectations, a ruler that makes no sense, and then you also have the best reasons and the best information with which to beat yourself up, and you put that with somebody who basically like really values the academic like excellence, right? The only way you get into universities like Oxford, MIT, or Stanford is by doing really, really well, by meeting those expectations, by working really hard, right? So I worked really hard in that first year,
yes.
and I worked really hard, but working really hard in the wrong thing is actually not sufficient. Like this work smart, not hard is not a question of like, how do I do less effort? It's actually a question of like, what requires my effort and in what level of depth? And actually, what do I need to do to get there? It's not about throwing hours at something, because everybody cares, right? Especially if you're at that level. Like, I'm not in a PhD program because I make a lot of money. I really don't make that much money, guys. My thing is I do it because that's what I want to do. But if you're in a position like that and you're not capable of doing what you want to do, you start questioning whether you have the ability to, and nobody around you gives you that external validation, then you wonder like, am I sufficient to do, like, why am I here? And especially if that's how you've kind of built up your self-worth up until that point. Like for me, I would say my identity was so connected to my work. It was my work, right? Like if my work was okay, I was okay. If you asked me how I was doing, I'd be like, yeah, my project is going well, like thank you. You know, like we're gonna see that next week. That's like how I would respond to that. And so what that last year meant, like this question of, okay, what was the indicator that I was going in this direction? It was the fact that I would honestly keep saying like, hey, that's gonna happen next week. And then somebody would ask me like, oh, where is it? And I'd be like, I tried something and it didn't work. But like, it's not, it didn't work, but it's like, I wasn't able to do it. It's like, I took on the agency of having to understand everything on the planet and actually taking on the responsibility of it having working, which is like just not reasonable for a person to do.
No. You bring up a good point, like you said, the validation we talked about earlier, and I think we're going into almost the imposter syndrome, that even though you're doing good, you're successful, but the measurement, or am I putting too much on me? So if you can go back and describe for people, because sometimes it's so hard to miss those signs.
Yes.
So what were you going through? Like you said, not feeling good, or is that times that you don't want to wake up and leave the room? What were you physically or emotionally going through?
So I will say, like for me, when I say this was a crisis of confidence, a imposter syndrome, you could say it was depression, like you could say whatever you want. For me, it was a combination of a mental and a physical thing. Like I just genuinely didn't feel like I could do it. Like for the first time in my life, I felt like there was something that I wanted to do, and I physically, as a human being, was not capable to do that. So what that meant for me was that my system, my physical system was out of whack. And this is why I say, like, I truly believe that your mental health impacts your physical health, and they're all one and the same.
Correct.
For one whole year, I lost my periods. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I basically was always either hungry or never felt like I was full. And I literally could not remember things. My brain operates very, very fast. I do operate on like 3 tabs at a time, and that's just because that's the speed that I think, right? But like at a capacity when I could not think and I couldn't remember a conversation I had or somebody's name or somebody's face, it was something where like, people describe it as brain fog, and you think it's a jargon, but it's something that I felt, and the reason I felt it is because I know how I thought before. Like I've constantly been aware of how I think, so I knew what that was. I have journal entries that say like, oh gosh, I can't remember this person's name. I don't know why I feel this way. And I know when it lifted because I could feel my brain actually working. And so it's one of those things where like, I felt it so physically, and it's almost like when it lifted, everything went back. I had been in the process of going through the NHS system, which is like let's say the national healthcare system in the UK. I was speaking to therapists, I went through cognitive behavioral therapy, I did blood tests, I did MRI scans, I did everything, both physical and mental. And at the end of the day, everybody seemed to conclude like, hey, like you don't believe in yourself. Like, and the problem is that when you don't believe in yourself, you won't believe in yourself unless you get there. Because it's not that people were like putting me down. Everybody was like, you can do it. They were like, I don't see the problem. Like, we support you. You're the same person you were a year ago. But it's almost like in that state, you have a set of armor on yourself and everything bounces off. Everything that was positive bounced off and everything that was negative stuck. So it's almost like I couldn't let myself heal until I kind of felt that I actually could believe in myself. This concept of like, you can only bring a horse to water and you can't make it drink was quite literally that. I think I've heard every single language, every single religion, every single philosophy describe the same thing. And I felt it because I could hear the words, but it did not resonate with me. It just did not hit.
You bring up a good point, because you feeling it and someone else thinking you're okay.
Yeah.
And sometimes you go back home and say, why they keep telling me okay? Because you have a different measurement scale for yourself versus what people are expecting from you.
Yeah.
So when did you get to see in your own self, I'm not well? And then when did you transition to say, okay, you said earlier, you are keeping a journal. That's a great thing. Maybe you can tell us a little bit how that started, or is it recommended? So actually, let's go back. if we can go back to the journal keeping, or how are you measuring your daily things, and then we'll break it down and talk about when did you, what kind of treatment did you get so that you really started seeing the fog. So let's just focus maybe first on how you diagnosed, I don't want to use the word diagnose, but found out something is not right. So the journaling, that process, if you can tell us.
Yeah, so for me, the thing is, I realized it wasn't right, and I didn't connect it to myself. I was just like, hey, my PhD isn't working. Like, I'm trying all of these things, everything I do, it's just not working. Like, I feel like I can't do this PhD, everything I do is not going there. And I just started attributing to myself. So basically the point where I would say it became a crisis of confidence, right? October to December is fine because it's like a novelty, right? Oxford terms are only 8 weeks. I was 8 weeks in Oxford, I was in the UK, I was traveling, meeting new people. I came home and I was like, yeah, of course I'm doing a PhD, it's fine. I went back to Oxford in January and it was kind of like nothing quite fit because I was like, okay, I knew it wasn't working in the beginning, but it's like probably because it was just the beginning, it's all new. But now I'm like, okay, I have more stability. I now know what I need to do. And I constantly was like, I was looking at productivity content. Everybody I talked to was feeling the same way. Like, this is a common thing among people who are doing their DPhils, their PhDs. It's not just me. And the thing is, so everybody was feeling this way. So I was like, okay, cool, like they're feeling this way, they get out of it, it's fine. But the thing is for me, like, and this is why it's each individual person, like my self-worth is tied to my work and was at that point, so deeply. So my work not going well and me feeling like I couldn't contribute in the way that I wanted meant that every single day was not meaningful. It meant that no day was worth waking up for, right? Like I basically, the days when I couldn't sleep were equal to the days where I could stay in bed until like midday and contemplate whether I should get up or not, right? It's the same thing. And the reason is like, I did that, right? I had days where like, I basically would stay in bed all day because I was like, what's the point of me getting up? Like, what am I gonna do that's so useful? Because clearly I can't do the thing I wanna do. Right? Like I was like, okay, let me just like leave my PhD program. But then I was like, what else can I do in the world? Like, I don't even know if a coffee shop would take me at this point. Like I literally went through all the scenarios, right? Because it's like, you're still the same person in terms of your analytical capacities, right? And your overthinking and everything like that. What is missing is your confidence. And for me, what leads me to be able to do everything I have is to be able to set goals that are higher than most people set and be able to say like, I'm going to stumble, but I'll get there. But when you kind of reach that point, but you find that you don't get those small wins, because what you're looking for is that major leap, what you find is that you just can't be happy with anything. And so what happens is like these moments that are actually not that bad all stack up and become like cracks. So it becomes like, the analogy somebody gave me was like, you can't, if a pencil is broken, you can't just like put it together. Like now you have two pieces that you need to work with. The sense of like, yes, I'm not as perfect as I thought, or I can't do everything that I thought, was almost just like mind shattering. It was like, okay, am I the same person? Like, am I capable of anything if I'm not capable of this? It sounds like super tragic and it sounds like very dramatic, but it's kind of like, what I wanted to do in the world is this. I came to the program because I want to do water and energy for the world. And if it's like, I can't do that, then like, what is the point? Right? So like, what I say is that, like, I went all the way, right? So what they ask you in a lot of these like depression things, all of these kind of questionnaires is like, were you suicidal, right? And the thing is like, yes, if you say like, would you have, and there's different ways of saying this, right? There's the question of like, would you jump off a building, which seems kind of extreme, but there's another way that people phrase it, if like, would you get on a train and you don't know where it's going and you'll never come back? Would you be willing to escape your life right now and leave and do that because it's not worth coming back to?
Right now when you're speaking, you're clearly stating the state of mind, how you're feeling. At that moment, you said some people said you're doing good.
Yes.
Were you able to express what you're going through, or did you keep everything to yourself and then they were able to see only a
So I did.
you?
This is what's different. This is interesting. In the beginning, I basically would keep it to myself to be like, is this really how I'm feeling? But something that I really believe in is just like learning in public. And I believe that like I have friends who've gone through different things, and like I will never know what anybody else has gone through if I don't share what I'm going through and ask for feedback and ask for help. So I talked to everybody I knew about this. Anybody who was close to me in many capacities knew about this. Whether they knew about it immediately or they knew about it later, it's kind of a question of logistics in many senses. But I talked to so many people about this, which is why when I say this is a common problem, I truly mean that, because I talked to maybe like more than 100 people about this, and on a week-to-week basis over the course of 1 year. And I've read texts across everything because I'm like, you know, I'm in a PhD program. What I do when I try to understand something is I read texts, I look at videos, I like try to make sense of what's going on and try to triangulate. That's the nature of what I do, right? So basically the point was like, it doesn't matter what language is written in, it's saying the same thing, right? Like everything is saying the same thing. They're all just trying to get you to realize that your mind and body are connected, and that the way you feel is dependent on the way you act, and the way you act dictates how you feel. And that's really the core of it. So the key is like, you need to be kind to yourself. Like if there's any key, it's that like, you need to be your own good agent in the world. Because at the end of the day, like this isn't being cynical, but like there is nobody else around you. You're gonna meet other people, you're gonna have family, you're gonna have people that are closest to you, but like you're gonna be the person you live with, right? You're the person in your own mind. If you're not kind to yourself, then like how do you expect anybody else to be?
That's a powerful thing, but some people don't know how to be kind to themselves or to others. So you journal, you understand, and then as a researcher, as a PhD research, you are doing an analysis on yourself, what's working and not. So really, some people may not have that, call it capacity or understanding, but from the reading, from understanding from. So what started helping you? You mentioned earlier family support, the research. So when did you see, or what step did you take to get out of that, call it fog?
So it's actually interesting. None of that works. So fun fact, all of that gave me a lot of information to beat myself up with again, because I was like, cool. Now that I know how the world works, great that I know exactly what I need to do. I just don't know how to get there. Like, cool, they'd say like, have gratitude. Everybody says to journals, to have like 10 things that you're grateful for. I still, because it's not been that long, right? It's 2024, we're in like April right now. I still have like a sticky note I've put for every single day with something I was grateful for, because I was trying to force myself to think in that mentality. Now that's something I journal with, and I write 3 things I'm grateful for every day, and it just flows naturally. But I literally could not think of one thing I was grateful for, and that was in November. And I wrote every single day, and I was just like, I need to think about something. I need to have something I'm grateful for. And some things were just like bogus. I was grateful for like this coffee that didn't spill, because I was like, I can't think of anything I'm really grateful for. But the thing is, like, that act is something that I continue today. And that's something like, if you look in the Christian tradition, when they say you pray before bed, you're actually saying things you're grateful for. It's something that when, like in Islam, people pray 5 times a day, it's actually saying things you're grateful for, and that's one of the prayers. And in Hinduism, it's the same thing. It's the idea that you're connected to other people, and you're grateful for the life that you have, because it teaches you something, and you learn something in those trials. Right? Everybody's saying the same thing, that you need to go through hardship to get there. But the idea is that how you react to it is up to you. There's people who have nothing who are quite happy, and there's people who have everything and are so insecure and sad.
Right.
It's a matter of mental state, right? Like, I don't really like big houses. I don't really care. I travel around the world. I just like talking to people, right? I live in a flat that's in a student accommodation. Nobody really knows or nobody really cares, and I don't really see it, right? I have a room, I have a bed, I have my friends, I have a bathroom. I don't have to share a bathroom, it's key, right? It wouldn't work in like Warren Towers in Boston University, but that's kind of what I need, right? And that doesn't take more than 20K a year. It really doesn't take very much. But the thing is, like, for you to be satisfied and for you to spread that to other people, that actually means you need to deeply believe that. And that needs to be the energy you send out, because you realize that's what's reciprocated. And it's very hard to have a mental state like that, because it's independent of what goes on. It's like, you can call it like wave surfing, you can call it just like going with the flow. It's the idea that like, it's not that you want your life to just go in any direction. I have a very clear idea of where I want to go in life, but I realize that the path is something that I can't control, because I only know so much. Obviously there's only so much I know. I'm only like 24, right? Like, of course I haven't seen the world. But the idea is that I don't expect myself to. That's the difference. I basically am very happy to say, I don't know, tell me what you know. I just have people talk at me, I ask them questions, I learn from them. Anybody I meet, that's kind of the goal, because everybody has seen a slice of the world that you haven't seen.
Correct.
It doesn't matter where they are, it doesn't matter what their name is, it doesn't matter what their title is, like, you can learn something from them. And the problem is we're so caught up on like names, what people look like, titles, all this stuff, that you actually miss that like, you can just have a good conversation, and your title isn't you. You weren't born with your title, and your title might be there when you pass away, but like, you are you. So I never introduce myself as like, oh, I'm an engineer, I run a company from Oxford. Most of the people I meet in random parts of the world, they just know me as like Gayatri. They know me as somebody who like is Indian with an American accent who lives in the UK. And oftentimes they don't even know what I do. And that's how I like it, right? It's not anonymity, but what it is like a human thing. I'm human first, and that's how I like to connect with people, because that is, at the end of the day, like everything else is just supporting you in just being a human.
That's a great realization, because a lot of people go in and attach themselves to a car, a house, or other things, and then if at some point they lose that, they lose their identity, and then they go into different kind of what we call depression or anything else that they may go through. So if you have to decide 1 or 2, I mean, like I said, you said a lot of things in it, but for just people listening, if you just said 1 or 2, 3 things, this helped me to get out. I mean, you may still be going right now, still early, and then you may have some days that are not really well, but what would you say, like 1 or 2, 3 things you can mention it helped to get out of that, call it I'm not worthy or I'm not able to do this, to get you to start doing that productive work?
So honestly, like for me, it was my family. The thing that actually changed things, and I can tell you by percentages, basically how things changed. In December, I was like December around Christmas time, I was like planning on staying in Oxford, but I realized like I wasn't going to do anything there. So I basically went home for the holidays at that time. And what started my like recovery to be coming back to like the version of me you see right now is basically being at home and just feeling loved as a human being and having nothing to do with my work. I was there with my grandmother, who really like tries to remember what I do, but for all intents and purposes, I'm in Oxford, I'm in engineering, life is going well. And that's all she needs to know, right? We talk about things that have nothing to do with my work. We like cook food, I like joke around with her, and we just chat, right? I see my parents who care about what I do, they know what I do, but at the end of the day, like, in my interactions with them, it's not like I'm not a business owner. I wasn't a business owner at that time. I'm not a PhD student. I'm not an engineer. I'm just a person. I'm their kid, and like I'm like the person that they've known from like when I was born. And like there's no title that's going to replace that, right? They still worry if I drive a car. They still worry when I travel. I need to send them where I go just because they want to know, right? And they want to be a part of my life. That was kind of the start, because that was something where they've been saying this to me, but I felt it. I felt for the first time after that entire year that I was like loved again for just being a human being, and that kind of reset in my brain. I was like, okay, wait, like I have a value beyond my academic worth. At that point, it wasn't separated fully. So that was like 25%. I left, like, my family's now in Florida. I left Florida feeling really good, because it's also sunny and warm there, right? It's actually everything put together. So I left Florida actually feeling quite good, and I had a conference in Abu Dhabi that I was speaking about my research in the second week of January, so about 1 week after I came. And I had this like energy when I came back from Florida to be like, hey, I can do this. There's something that I started in May. I really want this as a deliverable for what I actually share publicly with like the only people in the world who understand my research, right? And this is what I want to have at that stage. So I did kind of a push to get there, and I was able to get there. It took me until like 3 a.m. in the morning the day before the day of my conference, right? I didn't sleep that night, but it was something where I had that energy to get there. But if people talk to me in that time, I still, like every other sentence, I was like, yeah, I don't think I can get there. Like, I don't really know if they'll like me in this conference. Like, half of it was like, oh, okay, I want to do this, but the other half, like, the other word would be like, but I don't think I'm good enough. Like, it's okay. Like, I'd be grateful if at the basic extent, like, I can pass and the people don't like make fun of me. So that was basically mid-January.
So family
was huge. That was like, let's say like 50%, that was like maybe 50%. I wouldn't have even been capable of speaking this conference. I was about to pull out at that point if I wasn't there. Then I basically prepared to do this conference in Abu Dhabi, basically January like 22nd and 23rd. And I prepare in Oxford to basically have the work I need to do to go to this conference. And actually in the 22nd and 23rd, I present my work to this academic body, basically 30 to 40 people who are desalination experts, professors in the field. And basically it's the first time that I've ever just stood behind my work and just sat there and talked about it. And I just felt so proud, because I was like, okay, it doesn't matter if all the models I've done are just models that other people have done in the world. Like, this is my work and this is what I want to do. And the response from people was overwhelming, because it was kind of like, yes, first of all, it's real. The only people in the world who could say this is crap were like, oh yeah, okay, this makes sense. I was like, okay, cool, phew. Like, I might be able to get my PhD. And then the second thing was like, I just realized like, I can stand behind my work. Like, how refreshing and energizing and like, meaningful it was to stand behind your work for one time and just say like, this is mine. I know that it may not be perfect, but like I'm gonna stand behind it because I know that it's worth it. And actually doing that in a large scale and speaking to people, that gave me another like 25%. And I was so energized, and I talked to a lot of people during that conference. And then I was in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, super wonderful, you know, warm, very better than the UK at that time, right? I felt that way. And then so that was like 75%. Yeah. Like my brain started working again. I could noticeably see that. I could remember the names and the faces. I was like, okay, my like brain is clicking. I could talk to people. I was really energized. I was meeting new people, learning new things. And then the last thing was I started dating one of my best friends in that time period. And that was almost like this feeling that I have at home of just care and just somebody I can talk to was something that I had back in Oxford. It's almost this thing of like having another home just like took place. So it's something where I just almost like, that was the last like 25%. It was like, okay, like I feel loved and I feel appreciated, feel care for something that is not my degree and not anything I do in the world. It's just like me like cooking my meal, me like living my life. Like that was the final piece. And that was basically like what, January 24th. And then from there, I had one presentation, which was February 1st, my transfer of status. So this is my PhD. Do I have my project proposal? Can I move forward? And I was like, dude, I gave my presentation that I gave at the conference here. They were like, cool beans. They gave me some feedback. I moved on. And I started my company that day. I started the evaluation. I was like, okay, I really want to take this. And I can't split my time with doing business as well as doing engineering. So I called up people I knew. And I basically pitched. I was like, could not speak, as you can kind of see now, because I was talking for more than 20 hours a day. And I literally, like, my voice couldn't take it. But I set up the company on February 15th, and now we're a company of like 35 to 50 doing this work. And that's happened since February 15th, now we're around start of April. And the only reason that's possible is because the last year gave me the clarity to know that what I want to do is genuinely what I want to do, and also gave me the understanding that like me as a person is not connected to how this goes, such that I can be my own human being. I can cook, I can go play badminton, I can play violin, and I can do that not because it takes away time from who I am, but because that is also me. I'm not an engineer, I'm a person, and I choose to do engineering because that's meaningful. I choose to do business because I like it. I like talking to people, so I have a travel Instagram. Everything I do, I take responsibility for, not because it's easy, but because if you don't actually take advantage of what you do in your life, if you don't actually own it as your own, then it will never be your own.
I like that. So owning it and understanding yourself,
Yeah.
and then knowing your words is not attached to anything on the
Exactly.
outside. It's the family, the boyfriend, and everything else that you
Yeah.
described. It's who you are that they see
Yeah.
you at the end of the day.
Yes.
So two things I'm going to ask you, and then we can end
Yes.
the conversation. We have about time.
Yeah.
So one, what would you say, looking back at your friends, families, the question hopefully they could have asked you to know a little bit more about you or what you're going through.
Yeah.
What did they miss? So if you have to say, so next time, if they look at that sign of something,
yeah.
just saying she's fine, she's smart, she can do
Yeah.
it, what would have been one or two questions
Yeah.
that they should have asked?
Yeah, so I think there's, my family is always really close to me. So when I moved to Oxford, something I wanted to be really careful about is that I'm so close to my family, given that I used to, live 30 minutes away, so I'd go every 2 weeks. And it was like really, like they're really meaningful people to me, like they're my friends as well as my family. So the key kind of is, how do I kind of keep the interaction? So they've talked to me like every 1 week, right? So they knew that this was happening. And so if you ask kind of like what question they could have asked me, I think it's a question of, for my family, asking me more about my personal life beyond my PhD in Oxford, to be like, hey, like, how are you as a human being? And like, do you need, like, how are you doing, and like, how are you feeling about kind of the work you're doing? Because I think this is the kind of the cultural piece, right? In an Indian background, it's not that people don't care about how you feel. It's this idea that to get to the place where people are right now, oftentimes you have to suppress a lot of those feelings. So the idea is not that you don't feel as deeply, it's that you don't talk about it because you've forgotten how to feel them and not feel overwhelmed by them. So the idea is that like it's actually a kindness on their part to say like, I'm gonna give you the space to have your feelings, and I don't need to interject with that, but if you need something, come to me. But sometimes, and this is kind of the American culture side, which I really appreciate, it's this idea that like it's okay to not be okay, right? Like obviously you don't need to be like, oh, Mercury's in retrograde, like somehow like my life is ending. Like that's one side of it, and that's like very college, I feel like, and I've still heard that, which is kind of hilarious. It's this honesty of like, one of my sister's friends calls it like a temperature check. Like, how are you doing on like the sides of you that are not your work? Like, how are you feeling about like the fact that you haven't done your laundry this week? How do you feel about the fact that like you had too much to do, so like you didn't get to cook your meal? Like that also impacts your mental health, right? So it's a sense of like, how are you as a human being? Like maybe like, let's do a temperature check. I can tell you how I'm feeling, and you can tell me how you're feeling. And I'm not gonna try to troubleshoot your life. I think that's a big thing. And my family is really good at giving me the space to say like, I'll be there for you, and I'll be there for anything you want, but I'm not gonna overstep the thing and be like, here's your plan that you should do. But they're what they did, and this is something that they recommend in a lot of these cognitive behavioral therapy and actually any sort of behavioral change, is they ask you to have like an accountability buddy. So my family was willing to do that, right? Like I have no words to describe how much they did for me during this time period. Like they would wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning EST, and they would check in on me to make sure I was awake in 10 a.m. BST, right? And they would do that because they knew that like they had the accountability and they could be there for me. So every single day I would get a call from them. And I'd be like, okay, if anything, I would wake up to answer their call, and then maybe I'd go back to sleep and wake up at like 2 p.m. at that time, right? Like terrible hours. But I would do that because they were there for me and I cared about them in the way that I knew they cared about me. The amount of things that we tried in that time, and the things where they didn't overstep, they were like, I will be there for you and be the other half to check in, was so many things. But the thing is like, some things just don't work. In the same way that you're different, every mental health treatment is going to be different, right? So like what could have worked of me having somebody to check in to get up in the morning, having different breakfast, having all this stuff, like at the end of the day, like something will work, but you're gonna have to go through something not working, which in those moments feels like devastation. You're like, okay, like the doctor told me to do this. They told me to like go out in the morning, see the sun, drink coffee later. Like, everybody's seen these productivity YouTube videos, right? But the thing is like seeing the sun at like 8 a.m. in the morning, like might not do it for you. Like maybe you just want to sleep more, right? And that's totally fair. Like it's not that you're like inhuman because you want to sleep more and you're like a night person. Like all of these things are recommendations based on what works for somebody else, right? But I think the key is that having somebody that's there to be like, I'll just check in on you, I'll be your accountability, to be like, you can always text me if something's going well or not. And then that person becomes, once you get better, right? They say like, what are the red flags? They ask you this in cognitive behavioral therapy. You say you're better now, right? You score better on all of these like exams that talk about depression, anxiety, how you're feeling. But like, how do you know you're getting better? And what are your red flags? Everybody has to have different ones.
We're out of time almost,
Yes.
so but this question I have to ask you. There are so many people right now who might be suffering silently.
Yeah.
So what advice would you have for those, what they should do? Sometimes they may not have, I don't want to call it they don't have the courage, but they may not have the word, or they may not think like they're really connected. So one or two advice you'd give to people who are suffering silently right now? Yeah,
I would say if you're suffering silently, the first thing is like to speak up, but not to speak up to everybody, because at the end of the day, like, you don't need to, it's very exhausting to share your story, to give people the context of where you are, and it can be shameful sometimes to be like, you think I'm doing really well, like we met when everything was great, but now it's like, I'm not the person that you thought I am. I don't even think I'm the person that I thought I was, right? So find those people that are in your life that you know are like, I think it's a George Washington term, like winter soldiers, not just summer soldiers. They're there for you because it's you, and they're not just there for you because things are going well and they benefit. Find those people and find somebody to talk to, because what they'll be able to tell you is like your own personal narrative. They'll be able to tell you your own story to yourself. They'll be like, hey, like, you say this thing about yourself, but in reality, you're actually looking from it from this perspective. You're the person that did this with me. You're the same person that did that. You're reminded of who you are. And sometimes you need that coming from somebody else you care about who you know has no agenda. Because they're like, what benefit do they have from you thinking that you're a fake person? The big thing is when you don't trust who you are, you need to actually be willing to let other people in and help you realize that you're totally fine and that you are that person. If that's feeling love at going at home, if that's like going out with your best friends to like a hike, whatever that might be, it's gonna look different for everybody. Just let somebody in, and it may not be like their response might not be what you want, so find somebody else. It's kind of like this experimental process, but it will work out. The question is, it may not be quick, but the thing is, like, you're investing in yourself, right? So like, if anything is something you want to put time and energy into, it's this, because you're worth it and you always will be, regardless of what you do. Because that's all you need to do, like exist.
I like that. You're worth it no matter what it is.
Yes.
And then thank you for letting us in your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that others who are going through, when we look at you, when we look at resume, you're very successful. But last year you said everybody thought was the best year of your life, but at the same time you were going through a lot.
Yeah.
So thank you for coming and sharing that.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate Gayatri.
Yes.
This has been an honor to have you and an express, and I cannot wait to collaborate more and to do more and then learn also more about your company.
Same here.
Once again, thank you very much. This is the Yoftahe Show. Today we wanted to divulge in sometimes the effects of imposter syndrome, what we are going through. We may be successful in so many things that we do, but it could be sometimes cultural or sometimes not being able to express ourselves. But please do not suffer silently. There are so many help out there for mental health, but just Gayatri said, let others in, because sometimes we may be our own way blocking that help when people are asking. And for the other people, like Gayatri said, instead of just asking, what have you accomplished? What are you doing? All of those things, just go down one deep question. How are you really doing? To ask also about personal life to be able to help out. So once again, there may be a lot of people out there suffering. Please seek out for help. There are so many out there like mental health support. So we're all connected, we're all human, doesn't matter what culture we come from. So we really appreciate by having this time that there will be at least one person that can be helped through this process. Once again, thank you very much. This is Yoftahe from the Yoftahe Show. Please follow us on YouTube and subscribe, and so that we can get you more a weekly program. Thank you very much.